Hi everyone, welcome back to AP Psychology with me, Miss Baines, your teacher, and where you are able to pause and rewind me as I deliver you our latest content. So go ahead and grab those markers, get yourself nice and comfy, and don't forget those ever important binder notes that go in lockstep order with this video on page 4 called Unit 6, Prenatal Development. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so let's get rolling right into our next set of notes on a new topic, which is not just an introduction to development, but rather a discussion about the first stages of life, which of course is prenatal and newborn development. So that starts really at conception, right? Yes, you do need to know these kind of biological, anatomical things that go into creating a human being, and that conception is how one of millions, one male sperm fertilizes 1 in 5,000 female eggs, and at this point the egg, once fertilized by that sperm, creates this wall of sorts, right? This stone wall essentially that blocks all the other sperm from being able to get in, because it has to get what it needs in order to go through the early production process. It becomes this teensy tiny human being. So females, just a couple things to note about what's going on at conception when they are born. It's actually, women are born with all the eggs they will ever have, somewhere between 1 and 2 million. And it's through kind of this process that only 1 in 5,000 actually then mature. At the point of menstruation, females lose about 1,000 immature eggs per month and 1 mature egg. Males begin producing sperm at around the age of puberty, and they produce it all the way around the clock for the rest of their lives. Now, the quality of that sperm does not maintain what it was at the man's peak, okay, which is around the ages of 25 to 29 years old. Sperm quality begins to decline at age 30. At 45, men begin to experience a significant decrease in semen volume. Older men can also take longer to conceive a child, but they're still producing that some amount of sperm around the clock for the rest of their lives, okay? They're not born with some finite number of sperm the way that women are born with a finite number of eggs. Just something to think about evolutionarily. Okay, so let's talk about some genetics here and what we need to understand at conception. So this one new cell entity that is a fertilized egg contains 23 pairs of chromosomes, okay? And 23 halves are given by the male at conception. So again, one member of the pair from the mother and the other member of the pair from the father, right? And so it kind of forms these X-looking type things that are called chromosomes, okay? And each chromosome contains thousands of genes, either individually or in combination genes. And the genes produce the particular characteristics of each person. So these genes, so these little chromosomes that you have down here are created. They have thousands and thousands of different genes. And within those genes are thousands and thousands of more subtle little pieces of characteristics. Okay, the DNA. And the DNA is what makes us each unique individuals and different from every other single human being on the earth. And that is just so wild and miraculous to me. All right, let's talk about those 3 components again, making sure that we understand which thing contributes to which, because it's a pretty common question on the AP exam. So make sure you know how that works. So first you have the DNA, and then inside of the DNA are the genes, and then inside of the genes are each of the chromosomes, and each of those contribute in a way to make us each an individual. That is, like no other one person have the same exact genes or DNA that we have. So one more time then, genes are composed of sequences of DNA molecules, and some genes are responsible for the development of systems common to all humans, right? So some genes give us, say, our heartbeat and all that it takes to make the circulatory system, the brain, our lungs, etc. And then other genes control characteristics that make up each human to look unique. So maybe our eye color or our hair color or the tone of our skin, our features on our faces, if we have a small nose or a big nose, our height, our weight, or personality traits, and so on. Okay, sex is also determined by a combination of genes, but it's in the 23rd chromosome. So it's good to know, as a common question also on the AP test, is that sex is determined by the 23rd chromosome, okay? That's the one that determines gender or sex. Please also remember that female double X chromosome, okay? So the female in the act of conception can only give an X. It is the male that has one X and one Y. So he can give either one of those in order to determine what the gender of the baby is going to be with a now fertilized egg, okay? So, all right, now let's talk about what a fertilized egg really is. We call it now by its technical term, which is a zygote. And fewer than half of these actually even survive the first 2 weeks of a pregnancy. So fewer than half of all pregnancies, you could say, are ever even known about by the woman. Isn't that just crazy? It just kind of boggles my mind that, wow, fewer than half of all fertilized eggs actually become what you and I now understand as an actual pregnancy, and then half of them are just kind of flushed out of the body, right, with the woman's menstrual cycle. She'll never even know that she was, quote, pregnant, okay? It's pretty wild. All right, so after the zygote stage, which is the first 2 weeks, it goes into the embryonic stage, which is week 2 through 8. The embryonic stage is when the woman is finding out that she is pregnant after she has missed what she may call a late period. Then at 2 weeks, the zygote becomes an embryo, and by 4 weeks, the embryo has developed a subtle but rudimentary beating heart that soon becomes an actual heartbeat. It would be difficult still, though, to pick up this heartbeat from a regular external ultrasound. You would have to use an internal wand ultrasound, not an external one, to find that baby little tiny heartbeat. Also, the brain and intestinal tracts begin to form at this stage. These organs are very primitive at this point, so it kind of makes sense that they're developing first, since they are the most basic things that we have, you could say, right? Especially about the brain. Like, we are not developing all those complex neural networks up in our cerebral cortex yet, as we know it. We don't finish that until people of the age of 25 years old, right? Our frontal lobe does not get completely developed. We're not even thinking back to embryonic development, right? But they can be recognized as a brain just by looking at it. Around 8 weeks, the embryo is about 1 inch long, right? That's like this long, and it has these little arms and little legs and a little face that's already distinct, but very tadpole-like looking. But it's there, right? You can kind of see the human that it's going to become. Just to give you some images to go along with your understanding of what's going on here. This is a zygote at 6 days. It's just a ball of cells, right? A fertilized egg that's going through the process of cell splitting and cell reproduction. Okay, it's going to split and then split and then split and split 23 times. It's at 4 weeks now here, very tadpole-like. Okay, and so this feature here, this little thing, this little dot, is the umbilical cord, which fuels the body all the nutrients that it needs, all the nourishment through which will attach and end up becoming its belly button. This thing here is what becomes the heart, and then to the belly, these little nubs here are the little arms and legs. And this kind of tail thing here, this will form up to be the tailbone. I guess you could see the spine back here, and then this big thing here. The biggest part of the embryo is the head. And there are these other little nubs here that start to become the eyes. And the eyes are actually, in the beginning of the stages, on the sides of the head. They look like little alien baby, okay? And then they begin, as they grow, to move inward. Whoa, crazy, right? It's also seen over here at 8 weeks when it becomes the next stage, kind of at the end of the embryonic stage. And again, there's an umbilical cord still forming, right? Like, this is the little belly, and where the organs are all going to kind of start to be, you can see the formation of the eyes and that the head is huge. So they say at the end of the 8 weeks mark, and then all the way to birth is the fetal stage. So at week 8 or 9-ish is when it's called the fetus. This is kind of funny because really it's called a fetus all the way up until it's birthed, at which point it becomes a baby. But you know, people who have babies really get all kind of like warm and fuzzy about what's inside the woman, and they're always gonna start calling it a baby right away. But it's actually technically a fetus until it comes outside of you. So if you're a doctor talking about that fetus, that's the way it is at around 4 months during gestation, which is 4 months into the pregnancy, the fetal movement, okay? Strong enough to be detected by the mother, so she can sort of feel that heartbeat right inside of her, and that's at about the 6-month points, when the eyelids open up and the fetus has well developed and even learned how to grasp inside and has said to even have little tiny taste buds on their tongue. Super interesting, okay? So the fetus reaches what's called now the age of viability at about the 24th week. This is when the fetus can survive outside if born prematurely. Now, that rate of survival is only at about 50%. So about 50% of preemies or premature babies can survive at this age, and that percentage increases each week that passes by. So a doctor and their team is going to do everything they absolutely can if a woman were to go into premature labor to keep that baby inside there as long as possible, as long as it's still safe for the baby to be okay in there, right? And there's so many things that modern medicine can do nowadays to make the pregnancy as long as it can and as successful as possible while keeping it inside the mom, keeping the baby and the mom safe, because both are a priority, and keeping them safe until the fetus continues to grow and gain some weight during those last 2 months of pregnancy. And at the end of a normal 38-week, or technically 40 weeks, about 9.5 to 10 months of pregnancy, the fetus typically weighs around 7 pounds and typically will be about 20 inches in length. It's technically considered that it's 37 weeks when the baby is considered full term, but the doctors really want that baby to stay in there as long as possible in order to keep it cooking, as they say, right? As long as they keep it in there, the healthier it will be when it comes out, and it will continue to grow at a healthy rate. And as long as it doesn't get too big for the mom's stature, you want to keep her safe too. The baby is safer inside up until even the 40th week. Okay? When it's ready to deliver, okay, the delivery process, some prenatal influences we want to talk about first. There's genetic defects are called faulty genes or imperfect chromosomes, right? So you see, if something is going wrong with the fetus, with a baby at this point, those are normally caused by genetic defects. We talked a little bit about something called PKU. Long story short, it's the body's ability to break down protein. And every single baby since 1978 has gotten tested, and they test it immediately within the first few moments, or right after the baby is born and before they leave the hospital in those first few days of life. I think my daughter was tested within the first 24 hours of being born. They come in, they make a little prick on the baby's heel, right? A little heel prick to take a few droplets of blood and make sure that she does not have PKU. So if a baby does have PKU, it has an inability to break down proteins, and that is not life-threatening, but it changes a lot about how their diet is going to be as they're growing and developing. And now that we have testing, you can, and again with modern technology and science, they're able to really monitor their diets and make sure that they are safe and healthy and eating foods that do not contain protein. And so what would happen if a child who has PKU ate protein? Well, it causes both physical and mental slowdowns, okay? I guess what you could say is a depression of the brain starts to happen, and the body starts to brain, and the body and that brain activity is lowered acutely or immensely to a point where they would be wheelchair bound and cognitively not really all there, okay? Next, there's another genetic disease called Tay-Sachs syndrome. That's a disease where the body is unable to break down fats. It's kind of like PKU, but with fat. So, which causes these substances to build up and destroy the brain cells and the nerve cells in the nervous system, okay? Most babies, their systems will shut down, and usually a baby won't make it to the age of 5. When they're exhibiting signs of this disease around 4 to 6 months old, they will actually usually die by the age of 5, which is so sad. If both parents carry the genetic defect, then the child has a 1 in 4 chance of being born with Tay-Sachs disease. And to me, that sounds like most certainly they're going to have it. But genetics are kind of funny, right? It's a funny thing, and there's still a really big 75% chance that they won't have it. It seems to occur most frequently in Central and Eastern European Jewish and their descendants. And while I am not Jewish, my husband was, and so because I was adopted and not sure about my genetics, the doctors made sure that we were both tested and did genetic testing on me just to be safe. Okay, so let's spend some time now talking about that last one, which is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome occurs when a zygote, right, a fertilized egg, at conception receives an extra chromosome, okay? At the moment of conception, it receives an extra chromosome. So either the male or the female has given 24 halves of a chromosome instead of just 23. And this causes intellectual disabilities, usually from mild to moderate, and it can be even more severe, but it's kind of like a spectrum here, okay? And the person can fall on that line anywhere on that spectrum, from mild all the way to severe. Okay, it's often related to a mother's age as well when she conceives. So we're talking 35 and over, and the rate of her baby having Down syndrome increases at that point. Characteristics of a Down syndrome baby include facial features that a lot of people with Down syndromes have. You can kind of see it in their face. So it includes this sort of upward slanted eyes and with smaller noses, ears, and mouths. Sometimes smaller hands as well, and usually they're a little bit shorter than an average person. Their necks are often also short as well, and their bodies are rotund or of the round body type. And so these are just some of the characteristics that often are accompanied by other health problems as well, including heart, vision, and hearing deficiencies. So, okay, let's kind of shift away from talking about genetics and let's talk about environmental influences on prenatal development. The big one is teratogens. Okay, teratogen are environmental agents like drugs, chemicals, viruses, or other factors coming in from the environment that can produce birth defects. We talked about this a little bit in our last video. Mother's illnesses are a big one too, like exposure to rubella, which is a technical name for German measles. That can cause blindness, deafness, heart abnormalities, and even death. Okay, so a stillbirth baby sometimes comes from a woman who's sick with German measles. Syphilis, which is back in the masses now due to the population growth of incoming migrants who are suffering from a life with no health care, which can cause severe developmental disabilities now, both mental health issues and intellectual disabilities, right? Physical deformities and even miscarriages. AIDS, or HIV, is a virus that can be passed on to the child prior to birth as well as through breastfeeding. And some other things to consider is the mother's use of tobacco, nicotine, alcohol, and drugs, both illegal drugs like OxyContin or opioids and fentanyl that are legal prescription drugs. And then there's things like cocaine and heroin, and the baby being born addicted to either one of those drugs. If you have been watching the news at all, especially if you live where we do in a big city like New York, you know there's an opioid epidemic or heroin and now fentanyl epidemic. We have seen the number of babies born addicted to heroin and other opioids skyrocketing throughout the country. And it's just so awful to see babies born addicted when they're no longer going to be supplied that drug and they've become dependent upon it. And if you think about an adult going through withdrawals, imagine what a baby must be going through as a newborn. It's just heartbreaking, right? And some don't even survive the process. It's an absolutely terrible ordeal for them, and even some legal drugs can cause fetal abnormalities, and so doctors use a lot of caution when they prescribe the mother any kind of prescription drugs, even cautioning against some antibiotics. Often alcohol and nicotine use, which is actually pretty common, there's something called fetal alcohol syndrome. So fetal alcohol syndrome is the condition in which a mother drank too much alcohol when she was pregnant with the child, resulting in intellectual disability and growth of disabilities, okay? There are huge deformities and delays in both intellectual and physical growth of babies that were born from fetal alcohol syndrome mothers. Some physical features associated with FAS, or fetal alcohol syndrome, includes abnormally small babies and ones that have unusually small eyes, an upturned nose, and a smaller, abnormally formed brain. Most of them have some degree of intellectual disability, and many will have or exhibit problems with their attention span. Some will have severe learning disabilities and coordination issues, difficulties in their behavior, and a lot of difficulties in their relationships with other people, having a short attention span. Smoking, nicotine, or vaping can lead to fewer nutrients being received by the fetus, right? There's tons of research that shows that smoking stunts growth. Think about that in a developing fetus. So it results in the fetus having a lower birth weight. Heavy smoking may even affect the brain of the fetus. So we'll quickly wrap this up now by talking a little bit about newborn development, okay? So baby has arrived, and all babies are born with a number of reflexes. We've talked a little bit about reflexes back in Unit 2 during the biology unit. Well, humans don't really have provable instincts. We are born with certain reflexes. Reflexes are unlearned involuntary responses that through evolution and genetic mutation, all babies are born with. They allow us to better survive, and they occur automatically in the presence of certain stimuli. You need to know the difference in each one of these. First is the rooting reflex, in which the baby newborn will be touched on the cheek and they will automatically turn their head to search for their food, which would most likely be the mother's milk, because if you think about it, they don't have the ability to control their fingers to grab any other kind of food to bring it to their face, right? Or to eat it. So they have no control over their extremities at this point in time, but they can turn their face towards the mother's milk. So if anything's touching their face, if there's any chance of it being food, they're going to turn to receive it. Similarly, there's a rooting reflex, because that's the only way that they are going to get the milk out of either the baby bottle or the mother's breast. They're going to have to be able to eat, so they're going to suck anything that touches their lips. And if you even put a finger or a pacifier or a bottle, they're going to suck on that because it's a natural reflex. Okay, next is the startle reflex, and this one is actually pretty funny, okay? It's where the infant will fling their arms and fan out their fingers and arch their back, and all of a sudden it happens if they hear a really loud noise, let's say, okay? Let's kind of talk about that evolutionary reflex. So let's just say there's a big bang or a loud noise. Well, that is actually signaling some kind of danger, right? So normally, what would the baby do? It's making themselves as big as possible for mom to come and pay attention and see that they'll actually recoil into a similar fetal position when they're scared. They'll make themselves really small and unnoticeable so that nobody can find them, right? They'll be invisible to any kind of oncoming danger. How cool is that? Next up is the Babinski reflex, and that is when the toes, and I think this happens on the hands as well. The Babinski reflex is when the toes fan out at the edge of the sole. So if you stroke the bottom of the foot, or the side of the foot, or the arch of the foot, or the middle of the foot, the toes fan out. That's just kind of like maybe it's like when they're stroked, it's an attempt to get away from something. right? All of these reflexes are lost after the first few months and definitely gone by the 6 months of age mark. They are replaced by much more complex behaviors because the newborn baby at around 6 months old is able to start making association. So when they turn their head at around 6 months old to see something, it's because they know that it might be a pacifier or a bottle or a spoon with food on it, okay? So that about wraps up our set of notes about prenatal and newborn development. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.